Good evening. With me tonight on this special BC TV election broadcast brought about by the equal time provisions, more or less, and by the preemptions from the baseball game is, of course, Premier Bill Vander Zalm. Mr. Vander Zalm, you have invited the media and the public to determine what a conflict of interest is. Very simple question. Are you, with your holdings in the gardens, in a conflict of interest?
No, I don't see any conflict of interest there at all. What I've said, however, is that everything must be made public. Put it all out on the table so that people know what it is you own and what it is you owe.
Well, let's do that right now. First of all, give me your definition. You are the Premier of this province.
Absolutely.
Of a conflict of interest. Now, I'm not talking about a criminal conflict of interest. I'm talking about a moral and political conflict of interest.
Well, when W.A.C. Bennett became the Premier some years ago, he had a hardware business. He had built it up over the years. He didn't suddenly unload the hardware business. What he did is he told all of his people, look, the highways department used to come by and buy a keg of nails or whatever it was from the hardware store. No more of that. We can't do business with government. And I agree that would be a conflict. To buy or to sell to government while you're in business obviously represents.
Let me try a definition on you of a conflict of interest.
Try it.
Where there is the possibility of an appearance of a conflict whereby a public office holder may benefit from his position. Now, are you in that position?
Well, that includes everybody. Everybody in the legislature sometime has the appearance. We've got school teachers, and oftentimes we talk about educational programs, class sizes, salaries for teachers, benefits for teachers. So there's a conflict. Lawyers.
Fair enough.
We have lawyers, we have engineers, there's the engineering society.
But let me now be specific. What positions do you hold in the present government?
I am the Premier and the Minister of Finance for the time being.
Right.
All right.
What position does the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce hold with the government in the form of doing business?
Well, the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce isn't the only bank that does business with the government, but it happens to be probably the main one to do business with government.
Right.
In that they handle the daily accounts.
What loans do you, and I'm saying you because we know what we're talking about,
company
have with this big financial institution which depends on the government for much of its business?
Well, it's all done by debentures, and it's properly done. It was done before I became the Premier and the Minister of Finance, and it amounts to, I think, perhaps in the order of maybe, guessing a bit, but $5 million.
$5.7 million,
Yep.
Correct?
Yes, could well be that.
And you, you're the Premier of Finance dealing with this bank, and you're Premier and Minister of Finance, would a bank dare to call the loan of the Premier or Minister of Finance were he to get into a problem?
Well, they're not dealing with the Premier directly or the Minister of Finance, number one. They're dealing not with Bill Vander Zalm directly, number one. They're dealing with the business, and they have debentures from the business, and all of the payment schedules and everything is properly laid out. Now, there isn't a business in British Columbia, at least I don't think there are too many this day and age, that don't owe money from time to time to some financial institution. You can't be in business and not owe money at some time.
But, sir, you don't seem to realise you are the Premier and you are the Minister of Finance.
Yeah.
And you and your interests have to make payments of about $600,000 a year on those loans.
That's
Is
correct.
that correct?
That's probably just about right.
Okay, you're the open government man. What kind of cash flow do you have to meet $600,000 a year?
Well, that's not open government, that's open business. You'll have to ask Lillian in all fairness, but still, the business will do sufficient cash flow to make those payments, obviously, or the loans would not have been granted. It's not that easy to get money from a bank this day and age. But, Jack...
You don't accept my definition of a conflict of interest, whereby the appearance that a public office holder may benefit is a conflict of interest and a serious one.
I have said already that if I thought there was a conflict in any of these areas, I would obviously move it out. And if the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce became, if it was perceived to be too much a conflict, or a conflict for that matter, I would have Lillian make other arrangements, no problem. That can be done. But I don't really foresee any conflict of interest. What you're in effect saying...
You don't think there's one now?
What you're in effect saying is that if you're a businessman, there's no place for you in government because there's bound to be a conflict.
No, I'm saying you're the Premier and you're the Minister of Finance, and you deal with this big banking institution in your official capacity and in your private capacity.
Well, I've been dealing with the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce since 1962. And I don't know how long the government's been dealing with the Canadian Imperial
All
Bank
right,
of
let me give
Commerce.
you another one, because when you're on the floor of the House in government, as you hope to be,
Yeah.
you, said Webster, are predictably are going to be plagued by the opposition, asking you each and every month if you've made your payment to the government's bankers, in some ways, the CIBC, of $50,000. Don't you realize that?
Well, I appreciate that, and that'll all be dealt with through the accountants. I certainly won't be doing that. I'm too busy running my affairs in the government to be involved with the business. Obviously, I won't be there. But I can appreciate what you say about the extension and all of the rest, and perception, too. But, you know, it's sad this day and age that the Jimmy Pattersons of the world obviously could never become involved in politics, even if he wanted to, and even if the populace wanted to see the guy lead the province because he's a good businessman. He couldn't do it because he must deal with a dozen banks. I'm just a little guy, but I deal with one bank. He deals with a dozen banks.
You've had conflict of interest under the previous administration, Waterland et al., perhaps. Let me put it to you, when you're selecting your colleagues, would you put in as finance minister a colleague who owed the CIBC $5.7 million? Would you not say, hoi, 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 that's a conflict? He could be influenced by that loan, that big loan, all of his family fortunes are in that. Would you appoint a colleague as finance minister if you knew he owed the bank $5.7 million?
Well, I suppose...
I mean, to the pure, all things are pure. And
Yeah.
please forgive me if in any way you think I'm not questioning your personal integrity.
No, I appreciate that. And I guess perhaps the question is fairly put. But it depends on, you know, if there was within the government a business person that really had success and extensive business involvements, now offered himself to be in government, was a good candidate for the Ministry of Finance, would I exclude that person simply because he's got successful businesses, which in itself means that he's obviously dealing with banks? I don't think I could exclude that person simply because they've been successful in their business.
If I were a social creditor and a successful businessman and I were elected with you and I owed the bank $5.7 million, you would think twice before you made me Minister of Finance.
Well, but there's more than you owing the bank $5.7 million. Obviously, well, I appreciate what you're saying, but I don't...
Don't you think that one day, I mean, nobody's suggesting that you, a successful businessman, should now turn around and dispose of your assets at a fire sale. But people will also say to you, look, hey, he's talked about decentralizing the agricultural land reserves. Maybe that land will become a lot more valuable, and then you'd be in a conflict of interest, wouldn't you?
But you know, you can extend this forevermore.
Anyway, I've asked the questions, and you're prepared to be plagued by the opposition.
Well, what I'm saying is it's all open. I'm prepared to make, as I think everybody should, everything available. No blind trust where it's sort of hidden away, but instead everything out on the table, and people can look at it, and if there's a perception of problems, they can act accordingly. And I know the media will be watching it, as will the members of the opposition. But if there is a problem, I'll unload whatever it is that presents a problem.
If there is a problem, in due course, you will unload whatever.
If I thought there was a problem
Fair enough.
with the bank.
My thanks, Mr. Vander Zalm. More after this break. Mr. Vander Zalm, let's talk about some of your boo-boos in the campaign. Telling that woman to vote NDP, that was boo-boo number one.
Well, had you been there, and obviously you noticed, if you saw the TV clip, the response from the public was tremendous when I said, lady, for what you want, you've got to vote NDP.
She'd given you the whole NDP platform.
She gave me the whole NDP platform, and then all of the bits about how bad and how awful we were, and then she threw in the questions at the end. Unfortunately, the NDP, and I think that's rather... bad. They took the questions and forgot the rest and used it in their clips.
And then there was that dreadful boo-boo by Fraser, post-secondary education. If you're poor, forget about education. That was a bad one, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't know what the context, but certainly that's not good.
Now, SkyTrain. People are flashing around the SkyTrain, a unique investment opportunity. It's a kind of lease, the ferry deals, you know, sell the ferries and lease them back. Is there any government interest in this SkyTrain guaranteed unit capital gain bit which is being distributed?
Well, what happened back in March, April or so, Pemberton's put this proposal to the Ministry of Finance. They get these proposals quite regularly. And I suppose they've been sitting on it. Somebody apparently in the other organization, I guess Pemberton, somehow got a brown envelope to Williams. At least that's what I'm told.
Is it part of your plan?
No, it's not part of the plan at all. But, you know, finance really has to report on it. If they think there's some merit to these proposals, they'll bring it to cabinet. They've never brought it.
Would only be any good as long as the Tories leave in this $500,000 cumulative capital gain anyway down the road, wouldn't it?
I suppose it was presented on the grounds that it gives British Columbia an opportunity to invest and get some tax breaks back from the feds.
Why have you lifted the absolute ban on the export of red cedar? You were involved in a brouhaha today about that, and it was the action taken by you and the feds after the 35% impost on shake mills.
Yeah, we don't export any shakes or shingle, or we don't export any cedar to the USA, blocks or trees or logs or anything. We do, from time to time, permit by special permit exports of logs to Asia, but only when there's some place where they have to be logged because of disease or bugs or they're inaccessible otherwise, and you can't ship them to a local mill. There's no local market for them. In other words, the loggers have cut the trees because they've got to be cut.
They can't put them on the deck of a ship, take them out down the point and run them into the United States.
These particular cedars that they're referring to now were second growth so knotty they couldn't be used for cedar shingles or shakes by anyone.
You failed in your effort to get the IWA and FIR together, right?
No. I did get them together. I just failed to sell my proposal. I wish you had time to listen to my proposal. I think it's a great one.
I know what it was. It was a commissioner reporting June 14th, 1987.
Now, first of all, I said companies no more contracting out for 1 year. Include in the 1 year contract all of the pension provisions. IWA, send the men back to work. If you don't want to send them back to work, have them take a vote. We'll appoint a mediator for 2 weeks. If the mediator can't get it together after 2 weeks, we'll get Chief Justice Nemetz to appoint a commissioner. The commissioner will take the Hutchin report and the findings from companies and IWA and wherever else and bring in a written report by the end of the year. You accept the written report, game over, fine, we're okay. If not, we'll put it into
Monroe
legislation.
tells me he was misled in that he was told at one stage that the Hutchin words in contracting out would be included in the deal, but when he met with the boys from FIR, they said, no way.
No, listen,
You had David Poole there, and Monroe thinks he got that from David Poole.
No way did he get it from David Poole or from myself.
Okay.
David Poole was with me, obviously.
Next
I'm
question.
up against 16 people in both rooms.
The HSA have given you a basis to settle their dispute, you know, the technicians and professional workers, by accepting these 3 points, which include 10.2 wage increases on a 2-year contract instead of 4 years. Will you go for that?
Well, first of all, it was addressed to me. It should be addressed to the HLRA, the body that negotiates on behalf of government.
You don't want to get into that.
But the only thing I can say, I don't think there would be any objection to the same sort of deal as the nurses got. That's fine. But what they're asking for is 2 years as opposed to what the nurses got over the 4 years.
2 years instead of
they've got to
4
get back to HLRA and get their act together and see if they can agree.
Back to your boo-boos, if you don't mind. Quote from Bill Vander Zalm. Mind you, you've been very good considering your previous record. You've really been very restrained this time round. It would be ideal if women could stay home. They would prefer it. Now, do you want to recant and bring back all the liberated and near-liberated women into your fold?
No, this has had a lot of play in the media. But you're
a good boy at playing the media. You are the expert.
Yeah, what I said, though, is that it would be good if they could stay home if they would prefer it. There's not the choice for most women now. If they have children, chances are they've got to go to work because one income isn't sufficient to pay the mortgage and the rest of it. But if they could somehow stay home, it would be better for everyone, I'm sure.
Now, you did
given that choice.
You moved your initial...
Not forcing them to.
This is not a social credit platform, this campaign. It's the Vander Zalm view, isn't it? Everything you say is not thought out by caucus. It's the Vander Zalm view.
Well, no, these are things that Social Credit has taken positions on in the past, and we're reiterating them.
Okay.
Although we're not getting into heavy monetary promises for obvious reasons.
For example, you started out being very cautious about the minimum wage, and then you suddenly came to $4 an hour if elected.
Well, we had made a decision. What happened is we had made a decision. First of all, I was questioned sometime before the election was called about the minimum wage. And my response at the time was that we would review it and we would look at what the impact of the minimum wage and how it might best be dealt with. Then it was before the government. The government made a decision, but it wasn't released because of the election. And I was asked about it on the floor of some meeting, and I said, yes, it will be increased. The review will still take place, but it will be increased. We've got to act upon it. And then I was asked further as to what the amount might be, and I said the federal minimum wage is the most likely number that we would arrive at. The federal minimum wage is now $4.
I apologize for having a foreshortened program because of baseball and whatnot, but let's take one segment of telephone calls on the topics we haven't covered.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Everybody has made certain promises all around the counter. As Minister of Finance, what's the deficit in the current year in cold, hard, borrowed money?
The current year, we're just about $1 billion in deficit, and for next year, it's not going to be any less. It's going to be more if, in fact, we just carry on as we are and don't increase taxes. And I've already said we can't increase taxes at this time.
More restraint?
No, I'm saying that we are going to try and keep things much as they are and make improvements where necessary.
Go ahead to Premier Vander Zalm.
Yeah, I've got a question for you, Bill. First of all, just a quickie. I saw you on the Journal the other night, and you said there was going to be more restraint. Things were going to be pretty much exactly as they were.
Okay, is that your question?
Well, more restraint or keeping on as they are, much as they are, they're two different things. I don't think we're in the position now to start big spending programs unless we see terrific economic recovery all of a sudden. And we're going to work towards that end, but it isn't going to happen overnight.
What's your second question?
Okay, the second one is during your leadership campaign, you repeatedly said the problems were really very simple. The real problem was too many experts, too many studies, complicating things. Now you're the Premier, and it seems every time somebody asks you a question of any kind of specifics, all you can say is you have to study the damn thing.
Good point.
Well, I have to look at it, and I have to be satisfied that all of my colleagues are happy with the information provided them. That's not to bring in more consultants and more studies and to get into a whole lot of reports.
Have you got any premiership organization yet, or have we just still got Bill Long and...
It's much the same as what I started with a couple of months ago. I have a very small staff.
Are you going to build up a Bennett-type retinue?
No, but I'll obviously need to bring in a few more people. There's no doubt about that.
Go ahead, please.
Hello to Mr. Vander Zalm. I think that if he should be the Premier of the province, but I think he should resign as the Finance Minister. I think the portfolio should resign that one.
Well, thank you, sir. And frankly, I don't intend to keep it very long because it's a bit much to run the two. But on the other hand, I would like to get into this year's budget. But who knows? I'll have to appoint my cabinet probably next week or the week after.
If you win the election.
Well, yes, of course.
You don't
Stands
know.
to reason. No one knows, and we're going to have to work hard until the very, very last. It's going to be much tighter than what some people think it to be.
Go ahead from New Denver.
Mr. Vander Zalm, our deficit has grown to enormous proportions. We have huge unemployment and welfare and so many problems at every level of life in British Columbia. I am shocked you have refused to debate the issues. My question to you, Mr. Vander Zalm, is it not a fact that you refuse to debate the issues because you have no solutions to the massive problems in British Columbia?
Well, I do have solutions.
Tell her why you refuse to debate the issue.
I refused to debate with Mr. Skelly because I had my own plans all laid out, and I didn't want to give him a platform. I thought he should organize his own campaign.
Go ahead. You should have debated, but that's a good, honest answer anyway. You didn't want to give him the exposure.
That's right.
Especially when your charisma was sweeping the province.
Well, we were doing okay. We were covering the province, meeting lots of people. He should have been doing the same thing.
Go ahead from Victoria.
Hello, Mr. Vander Zalm.
Yes, sir.
First of all, a comment and a question.
All right.
I'd like to say that I think Jack Monroe should, as a good IWA leader that he is, should keep his business with the IWA and stay out of politics.
I could agree with you on that, but Jack probably wouldn't. I mean, Jack Monroe, not this Jack.
Oh, no, that's Jack Monroe I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you very much. If that's all you got to say, let's carry on. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, my question to the Premier is this. If you're re-elected after the election, your government that is your family not in a position to profit substantially from any changes to the Agricultural Land Reserve and Act that you and your cabinet colleagues would discuss and make decisions about?
No.
Why not?
Why would we? I would certainly not be in the position to make any application if he's referring to the gardens in Richmond.
The balance still in the reserve.
First of all, I don't want those lands out of the reserve because it just means the taxes, as I found out already, my assessments have gone from $1 million to $5 million, or I think it was only about $400,000 before. Now it's $5 million. My tax bill has skyrocketed. So why would you want to take it out of the Agricultural Land Reserve for a garden?
Do you see why I asked you about your cash flow to meet your
but I don't
$600,000 a year?
I don't think, no, listen, that's not where it's coming from. It's coming from the gardens. That's my business. I don't have a shopping center there.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, hello, Mr. Vander Zalm. I'm a student and I plan on supporting you in the election, but I was just wondering about the Royal Commission you plan on having, and is it really going to have any significance? And obviously education needs more funding, but is that what it's going to suggest, more funding?
Well, no, I don't think so. I think it'll probably suggest that in part. And you know, when I go to the meetings, everybody's concerned about education, and understandably too, because everybody has children or grandchildren or knows that the children are our future. But when you ask what's the solution, they say more money. Well, more money may be part of the problem, certainly. That could be a part of the solution, I should say. But as importantly, we need to know how the system is functioning. Therefore, a Royal Commission, impartial, no political hang-ups, can ask the students, the teachers, the parents, the business community, what it is that's lacking in the system.
Will there be no action on education financing until after this Royal Commission?
Listen, we're going to have much more money required for post-secondary education to accommodate all the young people coming out of high school that have no place to go, and we're going to be putting more money into the educational system.
Sounds like the NDP platform. They've been very successful with the job creation program for 54,000 youngsters.
Well, no, they're talking about some sort of a job guarantee program. And, you know, how can you guarantee jobs? They want people to write this up into contracts. They say forestry. By implication, I suppose this could mean anybody. And that doesn't make sense. That'll only chase business out of the province.
Go ahead, please.
Congratulations, Mr. Vander Zalm, for being who you are. And Mr. Webster, I want someone who's in there that's got a track record. You know, why hold a man's success against a guy? You couldn't have Skelly in that seat and ask him the same question because he doesn't even have a track record like that. And Mr. Vander Zalm, one thing.
Do you want me not to ask the questions?
Sorry?
Do you want me not to ask the questions?
Well, no, but I mean, it sounds like it's almost as if you're holding the man's success against him, and I don't think that's fair.
Good observation, though,
but it's perfectly
legitimate.
legitimate.
You have a successful man. Every successful person I've dealt with in business has some form of loan in a bank against them.
Yes, but not every successful man is also ipso facto the Minister of Finance as well as the Premier in the land business in British Columbia.
No, but
that's what you must face.
Yeah, I know, but the point he's making is that you want successful people in these positions because that's the only way the province will prosper and get back on track again.
But to maintain the traditions of parliamentary government, we must set certain standards of philosophical and moral behaviour.
I don't disagree with you at all.
Good. Thank you very much, sir. He's had enough. What's big do in Surrey tonight, is it?
Yes, it's going to be a big do, I imagine. It's been a big do. We had over 1,000 people in IMO.
You're giving everybody a little secret envelope. So will you give me one too? Or will you tell me on the air? What do you predict?
No, I can't tell you on the air except... no, I won't. I'll give you an envelope.
You'll give me an envelope
I'll give you an envelope.
I bet you're wrong. My thanks to Premier Vander Zalm. I'll be back with my normal program at 5 p.m. precisely.
Is a negative and a positive reference that constitute part of the kit.
This form of the kit will be sold to fertility clinics. The technician puts the first chemical into specially prepared test tubes. Add a small amount of the patient's urine, give it a couple of minutes to react, then rinse. The test uses antibodies, which react to the hormone that signals ovulation. After the test tubes are washed, another chemical is added. Again, there's a short wait, this time about 5 minutes. The technician now has the answer the patient wants. The blue solution shows that woman is about to ovulate. The other is negative. The kit you'll be able to buy over the counter is even easier to do. Starting from day 10, you take a morning urine sample and insert a chemically treated paddle into it. If you're not ovulating, in other words, if your hormone level is low, you'll get a negative sign. But if the hormone level is high, you'll get a positive sign. Then you know that within the next day or so, you'll be ovulating.
It's very easy to do, and you get the answer very quickly. You don't have to sit there for 2 days waiting for the report to come back from your doctor about, is it right or is it wrong, or is my temperature too high or is my temperature too low, sort of thing.
The future looks bright for Quadrilogic, which shares a building with the VGH Research Labs. The company beat out a major American firm to win a huge contract with China for its pregnancy test. They're working on several other tests now, and they plan to stay in Canada to do it.
If 3-4 years ago we had moved 30 miles south of Vancouver across the border, that right now we would be a totally different corporation. Well-financed, large size, we would have been progressed a lot further than we are at the present time. But again, we made the decision to stay in Canada. It is Canadian technology that we've developed. It's homebred. And that we are able to show that we can do it just as well as anybody else can.
The company's next test will be on the stock market. For the first time in Canada, a biotechnology firm is going public. Quadrilogic will trade on the Vancouver Stock Exchange. It would appear this company has hit the market at just the right time, when having babies and not having babies is big business.
Oh, when to get them? The clinical ovulation test should be in fertility clinics across Canada in the next couple of months. The test you do at home, they will begin test marketing in January. We'll be right back. So all the pavilions here at Expo open earlier starting tomorrow. Most of them, many of them, bigger ones at least, they have commitments from, will be open at 8:30 a.m. starting tomorrow. British Columbia Television's pavilion will be open at 8:30 starting tomorrow, and that'll be just hours or minutes after the end of the first End of Expo BCTV staff party. So you can expect the entire staff to be in fine form.
Jim included. Especially. Oh, what can we say to follow that, Jane? I don't think we better say anything.
You do the headlines, I'll do the weather. We'll get out of it as fast as we can.
Jane and I are getting out of town now.
Well, let's take a brief look back at the day's top stories to noon. 2 Vancouver midwives have been convicted of criminal negligence causing death after a lengthy trial. The women were charged after a home birth went wrong, resulting in the death of a baby. Expo attendance, talking about Expo, topped 21 million people today, and officials now say it could go to 22 million, with crowds of 300,000 people expected on each of the fair's last 3 days. And the Port of Vancouver is back in business today. Grain is being loaded, but container shipments are not expected in town until the weekend. Most container traffic detoured around Vancouver when a lockout was imposed 3 days ago. And now here's Jane with a look at the weather.
Thanks, Deb. It's going to be a beautiful weekend, but not exactly a beautiful Friday, in that we're still going to have to deal with our clouds and our fog that we've had in the early morning hours, but it's going to get a little bit better even for tomorrow, and then by the weekend it should be just plain out gorgeous. Now, what's happened is that we have this ridge of high pressure that has finally taken over and moved inland, and what that's doing is, other than giving us our sunny skies, it's also deflecting this fierce-looking system way out here further northward. In fact, you can almost see exactly the deflection right here. It bumps it up and it heads off into Alaska and such. So that means we've got lots of clear skies on the way. However, it doesn't mean we're going to get away, at least for Friday, from our fog and our low extensive cloud. But it's going to be a little bit better as the bulk of the cloud system has gone further north. Now, we're expecting to stay pretty dry down here as well, but we might get a touch of drizzle. We've had a touch of drizzle out at, well, down on the harbor this morning, but not out at the airport. Down here in the interior, things should be pretty nice. In fact, we're expecting this this bit of a system to move out of the way, and mostly sunny skies coming for tomorrow. And then up here in the northeastern corner, more of the same, as we're going to stay mostly clear. However, all of this means that our temperatures are going to go down. So we're having some frost warnings in through the interior, and then we're going to get as cold as -6 in the Peace River region. So some cold temperatures on the way, but some very blue sky, and that's always welcome. We'll have a look at our regionals as well. And we'll start with the far north, where we're expecting a mainly sunny Friday. Our chance of precipitation will go down to 20% for Friday, and there are those lows to -6, but the highs will go to 13 in certain regions, say around Fort St. John. For the interior, mainly sunny with some patchy morning fog, but that'll take place in the valleys. Our chance of precip is a nice solid 0 or thereabouts. The lows will go to -4 and as high as 1 degree, so watch for some frost in the valley as well. And for our coastline, mainly sunny, but we'll have extensive morning fog and cloud, although not as bad as it was this morning. Our chance of precipitation will be near 0% in the south, near 10% in the north. Highs will go to 16 degrees. That's not too bad. For our extended, we have general improvement, sunny conditions with just a little patchy cloud, and that takes us through till Monday. Now the sun will set at 6:36. You'll catch it up tomorrow morning at 7:26. And we have 2 nationwide highs on either side of the country, Halifax and Nanaimo, both with 18 degrees. We have 13 degrees at the airport. No precip in the last 24 hours, although, as I said, there was some drizzle in the harbor this morning. Our relative humidity is very high, and our barometer is rising. So it's going to be a nice weekend, and I think probably a pretty nice Friday, too. Now back to Deb.
Thank you, Jane. How about this from Des Moines, Iowa, a new game that children are playing in the schoolyard. They put flour in little plastic bags and pretend to sell it to each other, and they call it playing cocaine. School officials learned of it when a mother phoned to say that her son was pretending to be a drug dealer. Weddings. Apparently, there's no more climbing down ladders in the middle of the night, escaping with a fiancé for a quiet, small wedding. Big weddings are back, and the expensive accoutrements that go along with them are enough to lure at least one major fashion designer back into the business of wedding dresses.
Not everyone can have a fairy tale wedding or have millions watch as they exchange vows or have the media waiting for a smile and wave. But you don't have to be rich or famous to have a big affair, and that's just what couples are doing, bringing back the big wedding. That means weddings are turning into big business. Last year, Americans spent $23 billion saying, "I do." The price tag includes the cost of the ceremony, the reception, and clothing for the bridal party. The fashion industry, headquartered here in New York City, caters to those dollars. And where you have big business, you attract big names, like Oscar de la Renta. After a 15-year hiatus from making ready-to-wear wedding gowns, the famous fashion designer is back.
This femininity and romance, what I will try to put into a bridal collection, because this is what the whole scene is all about, you know, is the most romantic and special day that any woman or man, you know, can be, you know, involved with, and it's something that one always remembers.
But to remember it later means to spend now. De la Renta's bridal gowns start around $1,000, with bridal attendance dresses starting about $150. Price is not standing in the way of what the new bride wants.
Today, the bride is saving up her money for her wedding, and many times the bride is paying for her own wedding. I think you have a more sophisticated bride today. She knows what she wants. She's more of an educated bride. Many of them are executives.
The change in the economic status of women, with more working full-time, postponing marriage or ruling it out completely, means fewer and older brides with more money to spend on their weddings.
2 studies from Sweden to say that sex is good for you even if you're old. Firstly, they found that half the men studied and just less than half the women were sexually active at the age of 70. Secondly, they found that those who discontinued did so mostly because of depression and/or nervous disorders. Except for diabetes, they could find no physical reason why those people stopped having sex. Thirdly, they found that those who dropped sex also suffered a drop in intellectual ability and their capacity to remember things. Apparently, people who have sex, they've concluded, maintain their vitality.
We'll be back in a couple of minutes. I think probably most of us tend to think that male prostitution is limited to a few, mostly younger men who are on the street on their own. But this is not so, according to Donald Martin, who's written a book about this. Your contention is that male prostitution, especially at the higher price levels, is just as organized as female prostitution is.
It's actually even more organized when you think of female prostitution on the street level involving small-time pimps and very sort of small, ill-conceived organizations. When you get into the escort agency level, which is sort of the second echelon, it's organized, it's run like a business, but it's very middle class, serving very middle class clientele. When you talk about male prostitution in the upper echelons, you're talking about 10% of the population of prostitutes who service high-profile clients like politicians, high-profile entertainers, business corporate heads. And those clients pay a very hefty price, but the price that they're paying is for silence and discretion. They have a public profile that they have to maintain. They can't afford to use their Visa or MasterCard and charge it on an escort agency telephone service.
We should probably clarify why you've written this book.
Yes, it's based on a true story. It's called 1 Out of 4, and there is one of 4 friends of mine who's still alive. It takes place during the late 70s in Detroit, Michigan, where I went to school, to Wayne State University. And I encountered the central character of the book, who was in one of my classes, and I eventually discovered that he was involved in a very tight network of male prostitution. He introduced me to a number of friends. Some people I found very fascinating, some people very frightening, because you're dealing with real criminal elements, and they can be very dangerous when they don't get their way.
Now, these 4 men that you eventually wrote the book about, how old would they have been?
They were 18 and 19. One of them was 20, turned 20 years of age. They made thousands and thousands of dollars a week, servicing some very, very important figures. The problem is when you're a male prostitute and you're working on the streets, you're basically a freelancer, you're your own boss. The dangers you encounter are just the dangers that you encounter when you enter a stranger's car or a stranger's home. When you're dealing with prostitution at that level, the dangers are much more intense, because when you're 18 or 19, you think, sure, I can walk out of this, out of a year, I can go pursue whatever else it is I want to do in my life. But the problem is, it is the clients and the organizers who don't want you to walk away from it. And they can't afford to have you walk away.
Because they're afraid you'll tell somebody that they were
run
on
to
your
the
list.
National Enquirer. And, you know, there are kids from small towns all over Canada and all over America who end up in major cities like Vancouver, like Detroit, Chicago, New York, who get involved into the whole nightclub subculture, and they get lost. They lose contact with their families, they lose contact with their roots. It makes them easier to be seduced into what is initially a very attractive lifestyle for them. It's money, fast cars, fast and easy drugs, travel all over the place, and meeting stars and important people. But it's a very artificial sweetener, because after they get too well entrenched into it, they discover that there's no exit.
In fact, your contention is that the mafia is very highly involved in male prostitution, at least in the States as well as Canada?
In Canada, I have spoken to a number of police officers in Toronto and a number of male and female prostitutes in Toronto. The mob connections are not involved as far as the street level is concerned, or escort agency, but the criminal elements come into play when you are dealing with that very high profile.
We're talking about $1,000 a trick or something like that.
Minimum. $1,000 a trick. I mean, the price on the street, let's say, if you wanted some oral sexual activity, could be anywhere from $30 to $50. Going beyond that, when you get into the escort agency level, it could be like anywhere from $200, $150, $200, $250 for an hour.
So you're talking about very rich people here.
Yes.
Who've obviously been successful in some endeavor in their lives.
Right.
Who are...
And people who can afford to exert pressure and influence to keep people quiet.
Now, Daniel is the main character of the book. He's still alive.
He is.
He's actually successfully left male prostitution.
He has, yes. He left because in real life he had a very serious disease in the late 70s, that sort of lifestyle left you open for diseases like hepatitis. And he had a serious case of hepatitis from which he almost died. They wrote him off as dead, so they really weren't worried about him. He left Detroit very quickly after that and returned to Montreal, where he's from. He is not a cliche as far as being from a broken home or a runaway or a poor kid who was looking for money. He comes from an extremely wealthy Westmount family, a loving family, and he sort of breaks all the rules when you're trying to pinpoint who gets involved in male prostitution.
Now, you wrote this book to sort of say that this is happening.
Yes, because prostitution has been with us ever since Adam and Eve left the garden and decided they had neighbors and maybe they exchanged things other than money, but it's been around. We as a society are failing to communicate with each other in some way, either emotionally or physically, with our mates or our loved ones. It's unfortunate that we have to go out and seek it elsewhere and maybe pay money for it, but it's a reality. I wrote the book to open people's eyes and also to tell a story that I think most people would prefer to pretend it doesn't exist.
At the same time, Donald, your book is very graphic, and do you think there's a fear you could be accused of just furthering the desires of the people who take part in this scene?
Yeah, I've been told that I'm promoting pornography and promoting prostitution. When you talk about pornography, you have to look at the motivations behind the work. Pornography is used to titillate or sexually stimulate. How can anybody really talk about a prostitute's life and work without clearly illustrating graphically what that person does? Because that's part of their lifestyle. It's very indigenous to what they do and how they earn their money. And also, it's very ugly. And I'm not promoting prostitution, nor am I condemning it. It is a reality, but it's something that if you're going into it, definitely go in with your eyes open. And if you know someone who's in it, there are ways of getting them out of it.
The book is called 1 in 4, and Donald Martin wrote it. Thank you very much for joining us, Donald. A break and we'll be back.
Hi, we're here from the Abbotsford Massey Fire Department at the BCTV Pavilion at Expo. We're here to remind you to take part in the National Fire Drill to be held tonight at 7 p.m. So remember, get out alive!
The people of Nicaragua live in constant fear of an American invasion, and the capture of U.S. citizen Eugene Hasenfuss has reinforced the image of the superpower meddling in Nicaraguan affairs. While Washington denies any knowledge about Hasenfuss or his mission, the airplane that he went down in has been linked to the CIA. Now, the Nicaraguan government has its hands on a perfect propaganda prize.
Sally Jean Hasenfuss, the wife of the captured American, was told by a U.S. embassy officer to say nothing when she arrived in Managua. Her husband, Eugene Hasenfuss, may be put on trial here. The Hasenfuss affair has been a huge propaganda victory for the Nicaraguans. In the little villages of the north, cowboy towns like El Qua, it is an article of faith, not to be doubted, that the Yankees are coming. Not just Contra rebels, but Americans. Gringos. The soldiers drill for the day they will meet them in battle, and families practice scrambling to their crude bomb shelters, assuming someday American mortars will rain down on them. It is a fear and paranoia drilled into Nicaraguans by leaders like President Daniel Ortega. So the picture in the paper confirmed the fears of a great many Nicaraguans. There finally was the big American, handcuffed, led on a string by a small Nicaraguan soldier. The paper called him Rambo Hasenfuss.
A CIA operation, a CIA-operated plane, CIA-paid people were caught red-handed. And people in Washington right now are trying to cover their tracks, not very successfully.
The United States says Hasenfuss is not a government agent. But down here, that denial is seen as splitting hairs. The Nicaraguans have come up with a first-class propaganda prize.
Well, the American officials are dealing with problems in Nicaragua. Their president is about to touch down in Reykjavik, Iceland. There, a two-day preparatory summit will take place. The Saturday-Sunday talks between Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan will revolve around human rights, Afghanistan, and arms control. But it's the issue of arms control and, more specifically, nuclear missiles in Europe that will dominate the 2 days. One party very concerned with the outcome of the meeting is the Chinese. That's one of the reasons U.S. Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger has traveled to China.
Secretary Weinberger is here to strengthen military ties with China, a country which wants America to remain strong against the Russians, but whose own military modernization campaign is facing some grim financial realities. The Chinese worry that the Reykjavik summit could produce a deal that would permit the Soviets to shift medium-range SS-20 missiles from Europe to the Far East.
We believe importance must be attached to both the security in Europe and in Asia as well.
Weinberger has pledged there will be no such agreement.
You don't accomplish anything if you try to reduce a threat against Europe and increase it in Asia.
Weinberger's Pentagon is ambivalent about the summit. Many hardliners don't want U.S. missiles withdrawn from Europe, while the Russians can continue to threaten the NATO countries with both medium and short-range missiles. But Weinberger will support deep mutual cuts in medium-range weapons so long as the agreement is verifiable. There's no bargaining away President Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative. There's no halt in nuclear weapons testing, and no delay in deploying new weapons which will push America beyond the SALT II limits. Secretary Weinberger will find the Chinese sympathetic listeners. They, too, want America's military buildup to continue in order that the Russians will be confronted by Western strength in the field and at the negotiating table.
Ever notice how you always intend to, but you never get around to it? A lady named Mrs. Nett Creer lives up at Sunset Maria, fixes this. She's got for each one of us, look at this. Can you see it? Round to-its. There's one for you, Jane, and one
I
for
can
you,
use one of
Deb, and
these.
there's my round to it.
Oh, you
and
can wear
thanks
them.
for
They've got
being
a
with
pin
us.
on the
We'll
back.
pin the back.
I'll wear mine.
Have a good afternoon.
See them on Friday.
Equipment for this BCTV Pavilion telecast supplied by Sony of Canada.
From the British Columbia Television Pavilion at Expo, here is Jane
Awfully tight.
McDougall. From the British Columbia Television Pavilion at Expo, here is Jane McDougall.
Well, it looks like we're in for some improvement, generally speaking, although for the most part, the good weather is going to come on the weekend, but that's just about fine with all of us. Now, what we have is a ridge of high pressure that has finally sort of gained enough strength to deflect our bad weather off up into the very far north. So we're going to stay with our, improving conditions, shall we say, although we're not going to get away entirely from our extensive cloud and fog that we've had in the morning. So expect to have the same kind of morning tomorrow as we had today, and then expect to have the same kind of, let's start again. Sorry.